John Barry Meachum was a businessman, a founder of the oldest black church in Missouri, and a pioneer in the education of blacks in that state. Meachum was born a slave in Goochland County, Virginia, on May 3, 1789. Meachum learned several trades, including carpentry, in North Carolina and then Kentucky, where he met his future wife, Mary. By the time he was 21, he had earned enough money from carpentry to purchase his freedom and soon after the freedom of his father. In 1815, before Meachum had earned the necessary funds to purchase his wife's freedom, she was moved to St. Louis. He followed her there and then purchased her freedom with his earnings. In St. Louis, Meachum met John Mason Peck, a white Baptist missionary who had just moved to the state to start a worship and educational center for Native Americans. Peck identified a need for a worship place for blacks and enlisted the help of Meachum. Meachum, with no prior experience, built the first black church with the help of Peck and still continued his trade. After being ordained in 1825, Meachum officially opened the First African Baptist Church. Through the First African Baptist Church, Meachum and Peck began offering religious and secular education to free and enslaved black St. Louisans. Meacham School attracted up to 300 pupils and did not charge tuition to those who could not afford it. Although white Missourians had originally supported schooling for blacks as a means of strengthening Christianity, racial tensions caused many of them to now see educated blacks as a threat to slavery.
Unfortunately, during the educating of these young black students, racism reared its ugly head.
Around the time Meachum opened his school, St. Louis enacted an ordinance banning the education of free blacks. This ordinance was only sporadically enforced, but police did not force Meachum to temporarily disband the school. In 1847, Missouri banned all education for blacks.
Unfortunately, this man was simply trying to educate these black students, and the city of St. Louis passed an ordinance banning black students from learning. What a shame.
Meachum responded by equipping a steamboat with a library, desk, and chairs, and opened the Floating Freedom School on the Mississippi River beyond the reach of Missouri officials.
How ingenious. He didn't argue with the officials. He didn't fight with anybody. He simply opened his own floating school out of the jurisdiction of the officials.
And they couldn't say nothing. He outsmarted them. Meachum and his wife also facilitated the Underground Railroad through their home and their church. Meachum's carpentry business was successful enough for him to purchase and free 20 slaves. Meachum trained each in carpentry and other trades so that they could support themselves. Nearly every individual freed repaid Meachum, allowing him to free others.
Now here's a man, John Barry Meachum, who many of us have never heard of, yet he freed many people and he taught them trades. We often hear about Harriet Tubman and others, but here's a gentleman that I personally think should be a household name, John Barry Meachum.
Despite his work to free Missouri slaves and educate blacks, Meachum's views on education and black equality anticipated those of Booker T. Washington a half a century later. Black people needed practical, hands-on education so that when freedom came, the race would be ready to utilize that freedom.
Again, he anticipated this 50 years before Booker T. Washington.
Meachum illustrated this view in An Address to All the Colored Citizens of the United States, a pamphlet printed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1846. Meachum left a lasting impact on St. Louis. His school educated hundreds of free blacks and slaves, including James Milton Turner, who after the Civil War would found Lincoln Institute, the first school of higher education for blacks in Missouri. The work of Meachum and his wife on the Underground Railroad is now commemorated at the Mary Meachum Crossing in St. Louis, where the two led slaves across the Mississippi River to freedom in Illinois. The First African Baptist Church, now the First Baptist Church, continues to operate in St. Louis. John Berry Meachum died at his pulpit on February 19, 1854.
Again, John Berry Meachum and his lovely wife, Mary Meachum, names that should be known in history. They accomplished so much by building a school off the coast of Missouri, a school for black children when no one else would allow them to read in that jurisdiction. If they did it then, we can do it now. The Black Excellence and Abundance Channel, where Black history is every day.
Thanks for watching. We ask that you please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And remember, thou